A woman stood in the shadows of the opulent underground parking garage, a stark contrast to the gleaming luxury cars parked in perfect, silent rows. She wore a simple gray hoodie, the fabric soft and worn, and faded jeans that had seen better days, a silent testament to a life lived far from the glittering world of the restaurant above. Three young men, dressed in exquisitely tailored suits that screamed of generational wealth, stepped out of a roaring sports car, their laughter echoing unnaturally in the concrete space. They saw her, a quiet figure leaning against a modest sedan, and their amusement turned to sneering contempt. They approached her, their expensive leather shoes clicking on the polished floor, ready to eject this piece of refuse from their pristine world. They threatened her, their words dripping with disdain, completely unaware that they were not speaking to a lost soul. They were speaking to a weapon, a guardian, a brutal bodyguard whose quiet demeanor was the most dangerous thing about her. They had no idea she was the only thing standing between them and a world of pain, a lesson they were about to learn in the most permanent way imaginable. What happened next in that cold, quiet garage would not only shatter their arrogant worldview, but would also set in motion a chain of events that would redefine the very meaning of power and respect. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The air in the Pinnacle's subterranean garage was cold, filtered, and carried the faint, sterile scent of concrete, mingling with the expensive perfume of its clientele. Anya Volkov felt the chill not on her skin, protected by her well-worn hoodie, but as a familiar environmental data point. She registered the precise humidity, the subtle drafts from the ventilation system, and the distinct acoustic properties of the sprawling space. Every echo, every distant hum of the elevator, every soft squeal of tires, was a note in a complex symphony that she was constantly analyzing. Her posture, seemingly relaxed as she leaned against the fender of a dark gray sedan, was a deliberate study in misdirection. To the casual observer, she was a chauffeur, or perhaps someone waiting for a friend, utterly insignificant and forgettable. This was her camouflage, a tool as vital as the compact, high-tensile-strength ceramic blade sheathed discreetly at the small of her back, or the lightning-fast reflexes coiled in her muscles. Her eyes, a calm and steady shade of slate, were never still. They didn't dart or flit nervously. They moved with a slow, deliberate economy, absorbing details with an almost inhuman capacity. She tracked the movements of the valet, a young man named Ben with a nervous energy, his posture too eager to please. She noted the positions of the security cameras, their blind spots, and the predictable sweep of their lenses. She was a ghost in this machine of wealth. A silent guardian to a man who shaped the world from the penthouse suites and exclusive dining rooms above. Her client, Alistair Finch, valued privacy and efficiency above all else, and Anya was the living embodiment of both. He was a man who commanded armies of engineers and analysts, but when it came to his personal safety, he trusted only her. She was not just a bodyguard, she was a strategist, a risk analyst, and, when necessary, an instrument of overwhelming force. Her simplicity was her strength. In a world of peacocks, she was a sparrow, and no one ever saw the hawk hidden within the sparrow's feathers. The soft purr of a finely tuned engine grew into an aggressive roar, and she shifted her weight, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. The sound was wrong. It was too loud, too ostentatious for this environment. It was a display, a demand for attention, and in Anya's experience, those who demanded attention were often the first to create problems. A low-slung, cherry-red sports car, a marvel of Italian engineering, screamed around the corner and slid into a reserved spot with a final, obnoxious rev of its engine. The doors opened upwards like wings, and from the vehicle emerged three young men who carried themselves with the unthinking arrogance of those who had never been told no in their lives. They were preening, adjusting their silk ties and bespoke suit jackets, their laughter sharp and condescending as they surveyed their kingdom of concrete and steel. Anya's senses sharpened. They were not a direct threat, not yet, but they were a variable, an anomaly in the controlled environment she prided herself on maintaining. She catalogued their appearances: expensive watches that caught the sterile light, perfectly coiffed hair, and the kind of smug expressions that could only be purchased with inherited money. The leader of the trio, a man with a sharp jawline and cruel eyes, caught sight of her. His laughter faltered, replaced by a look of profound offense, as if her very presence was a personal insult. He gestured to his friends, a silent communication passing between them, and they began to walk towards her, their strides confident and menacing. Anya did not move. Her breathing remained slow and even. She was a rock in the stream, and the water was about to break against her. She had faced down armed insurgents in war-torn countries and dismantled corporate espionage rings in sterile boardrooms. 3 spoiled children in expensive suits were barely a footnote in her operational history, but they were a footnote that had to be dealt with before they could become a chapter. Her purpose was singular: protect Alistair Finch, and these men, in their blissful, dangerous ignorance, were now standing directly in the way of that purpose. The leader, Marcus, stopped a few feet from her, his friends fanning out to his sides, a classic, if amateurish, attempt at intimidation. He looked her up and down, his lip curling in a sneer. "Are you lost, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice a silken weapon of condescension. "The soup kitchen is on the other side of town. This is for a certain class of people." His friends, Julian and Leo, snickered in perfect, rehearsed harmony. Anya's eyes met his, and she offered no reaction. Her face was a placid mask, revealing nothing of the tactical calculations happening behind her gaze. She noted his posture, the slight forward lean, the way he puffed out his chest. Textbook alpha posturing, predictable. "I'm where I need to be," she said, her voice even and low, carrying no trace of fear or defiance. It was a simple statement of fact, but in this context, it was an act of rebellion. It failed to acknowledge his assumed superiority, and that infuriated him. "You need to be somewhere else," Julian chimed in, stepping forward. He was shorter than Marcus but broader. A bull in a china shop of his own making. "This parking spot, for instance, costs more per month than that entire outfit you're wearing is worth. We don't want your kind loitering around." He gestured vaguely at her simple hoodie and jeans as if they were leprous rags. The young valet, Ben, watched from a distance, wringing his hands. He wanted to intervene, to say something, but a single cold glare from Marcus had frozen him in place. He was a good kid, but he was also a kid who needed this job, and the sons of the city's most powerful men were not people you crossed. Anya felt a flicker of sympathy for the boy, but dismissed it. Emotions were a liability in the field. She remained focused on the immediate problem. "I am not loitering," she replied, her gaze still locked on Marcus. "I am waiting." Her calmness was like fuel on the fire of their arrogance. They expected fear, or at least submission. They expected her to stammer an apology and scurry away. Her placid refusal to play her assigned role in their little drama was an intolerable affront. "Waiting for what?" Leo sneered, a wiry man with a nervous energy that suggested a life of vicarious confidence. "For a handout? For someone to feel sorry for you and toss you a few scraps from their table?" He took a deliberate step towards the sedan she was leaning against and ran a finger along its clean surface, leaving a smug smudge. "This is a pretty pathetic car to be begging next to. If you're going to be a parasite, at least attach yourself to a better host." Anya's eyes flickered to the smudge on the car and then back to Leo's face. A new calculation entered her mind. They had now made physical contact with the perimeter she had established around her client's assets. It was a minor infraction, but it was a line crossed. Her body remained still, but a switch had been flipped deep within her. The passive observation mode was shifting towards active readiness. She could feel the familiar, cool hum of adrenaline beginning to course through her veins, not the frantic rush of fear, but the controlled, focused surge of a professional preparing to go to work. She had analyzed their weaknesses in the first 3 seconds of the encounter. Marcus was the ego, Julian the muscle, and Leo the instigator. A classic triad of bullies. Dismantle the ego, and the other two would crumble. "You should take your hand off the car," Anya said. Her tone had not changed, but the words themselves were a command, not a request. This subtle shift was lost on them. To them, it was just more impudence from someone who didn't know her place. Leo laughed, a high-pitched, unpleasant sound. He pressed his entire palm against the car's window, enjoying the sense of violation. Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead. I'd love to see the look on their faces when they have to haul your trashy self out of here. Marcus stepped closer, invading her personal space. He was tall enough to look down on her, and he used the height to its full advantage. The scent of his expensive, cloying cologne washed over her. It smelled of entitlement. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, lowering his voice into a mock, serious growl. "My father is on the board of directors for the corporation that owns this entire building. One word from me, and the security here will not be gentle in removing you. They will throw you out onto the street like the garbage you are. Do you understand me?" He was so close now that she could see the tiny, broken capillaries in his eyes, a sign of a life of excess. She could also see the pulsating vein in his neck, a perfect target. She could disable him in less than a second. A single, precise strike to the throat. Julian would be next. A quick jab to the solar plexus to incapacitate him. Leo, the coward, would already be running. It would be efficient, clean, and utterly silent. But that was not the mission. The mission was discretion. The mission was protecting Mr. Dace, that pawn. Finch, and a public brawl in a parking garage was the opposite of discreet. So she held back. She absorbed their threats, their insults, their suffocating arrogance, and she filed it all away. She took a slow, deliberate breath, a technique she had mastered to keep her heart rate steady under extreme duress. "You are making a mistake," she said simply. Her response, so devoid of the groveling terror they expected, pushed Marcus over the edge. His face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, twisted into a knot of genuine rage. The game was no longer fun for him. His authority had been challenged by a nobody, and he could not tolerate it. "A mistake?" he spat, his voice rising. "You think you're in a position to tell me I'm making a mistake? People like you don't get to talk to people like me. You exist to serve us, to get out of our way, to be invisible." He poked a finger into her shoulder, a sharp, jabbing motion. "You are nothing." That was the second time a line had been crossed. The first was property. This was personal. Anya's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Her entire body tensed, the muscles in her back and shoulders contracting like steel cables. She didn't move back from his touch. She absorbed the force of it without giving a single inch. To him, it probably felt like poking a statue. She let the silence stretch for a moment, letting his insult hang in the air between them. The two friends shuffled their feet, a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes for the first time. Anya's utter lack of fear was beginning to feel less like weakness and more like something else, something they couldn't quite understand, and it made them uneasy. The atmosphere in the garage had shifted. The air was thick with tension, a coiled spring of imminent violence. "I'm going to give you one final chance," Marcus said, his voice dropping again, trying to regain control of the situation he had created. "Walk away now. Get out of this garage, out of this building, and never come back. If you do, I'll forget this ever happened. If you don't—" He let the threat linger, confident in its power. Anya remained silent. Her mind was a whirlwind of activity. She was running through dozens of scenarios, calculating probabilities, and preparing contingency plans. The elevator at the far end of the garage chimed softly, a sound that cut through the tension like a knife. The doors slid open. Marcus and his friends didn't notice. They were too consumed by their own drama, too focused on breaking the will of the woman in front of them. But Anya noticed. It was the sound she had been waiting for. It was the reason she was here. Out of the elevator stepped a man of average height with a kind, unassuming face and graying hair. He was dressed in a simple but well-tailored suit. He was Alistair Finch, one of the most powerful and influential men on the planet. A titan of industry whose decisions could shape the global economy. At his side were two other men in dark suits, members of his secondary detail, their eyes sharp and professional. Finch's gaze swept the scene, taking in the three young men menacing his head of security. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a glacial calm that was far more terrifying than any overt display of anger. "Anya," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority that cut through the garage. "Is there a problem here?" The sound of his voice finally broke the spell. Marcus, Julian, and Leo turned, their jaws dropping in unison. They recognized Alistair Finch instantly. His face was a regular feature in magazines and on news broadcasts. He was a living legend, a man they aspired to be, a man their fathers desperately courted for business deals. The change was instantaneous and sickeningly complete. The sneering arrogance evaporated, replaced by a fawning, desperate obsequiousness. "Mr. Finch," Marcus stammered, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. He rushed forward, his hand outstretched, a pathetic, sycophantic grin plastered on his face. "What an honor! We had no idea you were here. We were just handling a situation." "This person." She was refusing to leave. He waved a dismissive hand in Anya's direction, trying to frame himself as a protector of order, as an ally. Finch ignored the outstretched hand completely. He didn't even glance at Marcus. His full attention was on Anya. He trusted her judgment implicitly. She was his eyes and ears, his first line of defense against a world that was often hostile. "Report," he said, the single word a command. Anya straightened up, her relaxed posture vanishing, replaced by the crisp, efficient bearing of a professional. "3 unidentified males, sir," she began, her voice clear and precise, devoid of any emotion. "They initiated contact with aggressive and condescending language. They made multiple verbal threats and twice crossed the physical perimeter, once against the vehicle and once against my person." She delivered the report as if she were detailing a minor logistical issue, but every word was a nail in the coffin of the 3 young men. They stared at her, their minds struggling to process what was happening. Her transformation from a silent, unassuming woman into this articulate, professional operative was a shock to their system. They couldn't reconcile the 2 images. Then Finch turned his gaze upon Marcus, and for the first time in his pampered, privileged life, Marcus knew what it was to feel true, unadulterated fear. The billionaire's eyes were like chips of ice. "This person," Finch said, his voice dangerously soft, "is Anya Volkov. She is my head of security. She is a former Special Forces operative with commendations for bravery from 3 different governments. She is an expert in 17 different forms of hand-to-hand combat, a master strategist, and one of the most respected private security contractors in the world. And you just threatened her." The silence that followed Finch's words was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb all sound in the garage. The smug grins had long since vanished from the faces of Marcus, Julian, and Leo, replaced by masks of pale, slack-jawed horror. The reality of their situation was crashing down on them like a tidal wave of ice water. They hadn't been putting a vagrant in her place. They had been harassing a highly trained, lethally competent professional who was under the protection of one of the most powerful men in the world. The world they had known, a world that bent to their will and catered to their whims, had suddenly and violently tilted on its axis. "Mr. Finch, we had no idea," Marcus stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. The confident alpha male had dissolved, leaving behind a terrified boy. "It was a misunderstanding, a terrible misunderstanding." Finch took a slow step forward, and the 3 of them flinched back as if he had struck them. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, his voice still deceptively quiet. "You saw a woman standing alone, dressed in simple clothing, and you assumed you had the right to harass and threaten her. You judged her based on her appearance, and you found her wanting. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a failure of character." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Ms. Volkov is in my employ precisely because she does not look like a bodyguard. She is discreet, she is unassuming, and she is incredibly effective. Her appearance is a deliberate tactical choice. A choice that allows her to protect me without drawing unnecessary attention. You, on the other hand, you draw nothing but unnecessary attention." He pulled out his phone, his movements calm and deliberate. He tapped the screen a few times, his thumb moving with an unnerving purpose. The 3 men watched, their eyes wide with terror, as if he were holding a weapon. In a way, he was. His phone was a conduit to a level of power they could barely comprehend. "Your name is Marcus Thorne, isn't it?" Finch asked, not looking up from his phone. "Son of Robert Thorne of Thorne Industries." Marcus could only nod, his throat too tight to form words. "And you?" Finch continued, his gaze flicking to the other two. "Are Julian Croft and Leo Vance. Your fathers are also associates of mine." He used the word associates with a distinct tone of distaste. "I was scheduled to have dinner with your fathers next week to finalize the details of a rather significant merger. A merger that would have been incredibly profitable for all three of your families." He finally looked up, his eyes locking onto Marcus's. "That dinner is now cancelled. The merger is off the table. I do not do business with people who raise bullies and fools for sons. I do not do business with people whose families exhibit such a profound lack of judgment and basic human decency." The color drained completely from their faces. This was worse than just being yelled at. This was ruin. This was a catastrophic blow to their families' fortunes and reputations, and it was entirely their fault. They had, in the span of 5 arrogant minutes, undone years of their father's hard work. "No, please, Mr. Finch," Leo begged, his voice cracking. "It was just a joke. We were just having some fun. Please don't punish our families for our mistake." "This was not fun," Anya said, speaking for the first time since her report. Her voice was still calm, but it had an edge of cold steel that made them all flinch. "You were hostile. You were threatening. Your intent was to intimidate and humiliate." Finch nodded in agreement. "Ms. Volkov's assessment is, as always, accurate. This was not a joke. This was an exercise in cruelty. You get your fun from punching down, from preying on those you perceive to be weaker than you. The problem for you is that you made a catastrophic miscalculation about who was weak and who was strong." He put his phone to his ear. "Robert, Alistair Finch. I'm afraid I have some bad news regarding your son." The one-sided conversation was brief and brutal. Finch spoke in calm, measured tones, but every word was a hammer blow, dismantling the future of Thorne Industries. Marcus sank to his knees, his tailored suit crumpling on the cold concrete. He looked up at Anya, at this quiet, unassuming woman who had brought his entire world crashing down without raising her voice or lifting a finger. He saw no triumph in her eyes, no satisfaction, no anger. He saw only a calm, professional emptiness, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. She was so far beyond him, so completely out of his league, that he didn't even register as an enemy. He was just a problem that had been efficiently and ruthlessly solved. The phone calls to the other two fathers were just as devastatingly efficient. Alistair Finch methodically and dispassionately explained the situation, detailing their son's behavior with the precision of a legal document. He made it clear that his decision was not personal, but a matter of professional principle. Trust, he explained, was the cornerstone of his business empire, and their sons had demonstrated that their families could not be trusted to cultivate sound judgment or basic human decency. The financial and social fallout would be immense, a stain that would follow their families for years, if not decades. When he was done, he slipped his phone back into his pocket and looked down at the 3 broken young men. Julian was openly weeping, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. Leo stared blankly at the concrete floor, his face a mask of utter despair. Marcus remained on his knees, his head bowed in a posture of complete and total defeat. The valet Ben watched from a safe distance, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. He had never witnessed such a swift and total dismantling of power. The Pinnacle's own security guards finally arrived, alerted by Finch's secondary detail. They were large, imposing men in crisp uniforms, but they approached the scene with caution, clearly understanding that they were walking into a situation far above their pay grade. They looked to Finch for instructions. "These men will be leaving now," Finch said calmly. "They are to be escorted from the premises and are to be informed that they are banned from this establishment for life. Ensure their departure is quiet." The head of security nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He and his partner helped a shell-shocked Marcus to his feet and began to lead the 3 of them towards the exit. Before they left, Finch stopped them one last time. "The apology you owe is not to me," he said, his voice ringing with finality. "It is to Ms. Volkov." The three of them turned, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a dawning, horrified respect. They looked at Anya, this woman they had dismissed as trash, and saw her for what she was, an immovable object, a force of nature they had foolishly tried to push. I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, the words catching in his throat. It was likely the first genuine apology he had ever offered in his life. Anya simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was not forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement of his surrender. It was a signal that the engagement was over. Nothing more, nothing less. As they were led away, their designer suits looking like cheap costumes on defeated actors, Finch turned to Anya. "Are you all right?" he asked, a genuine note of concern in his voice. "I am fully operational, sir," she replied, the professional mask slipping back into place. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "I have no doubt. But that's not what I asked." She considered the question for a moment. She replayed the insults, the threats, the physical contact. She analyzed her own emotional response, or lack thereof. "It was unpleasant," she conceded, "but not damaging. Their underestimation of the situation was their weakness, not mine." Finch nodded, his respect for her growing, as it always did, with every interaction. He then turned his attention to the valet, who was trying his best to become one with the concrete pillar he was hiding behind. "Young man," Finch said, his voice now warm and approachable, "what's your name?" "Ben, sir," the young man stammered, his eyes wide. "Ben, you witnessed this entire event. You saw how these men behaved. And you saw how Ms. Volkov conducted herself. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. I saw everything." "Thank you for your honesty, Ben." Finch reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. "I am establishing a new training program for all my corporate partners. A program focused on situational awareness, de-escalation, and professional respect. It's to be run by Ms. Volkov's consulting firm. I think you might have a valuable perspective to offer. Give my office a call tomorrow." Ben took the card with a trembling hand, staring at the embossed name as if it were a holy relic. In a single evening, his life had been irrevocably changed, just as the lives of the three arrogant young men had been. Power had been wielded in that garage, but it was not the brutish, loud power of Marcus and his friends. It was the quiet, unshakable power of competence and character. A power that didn't need to shout to be heard. Anya watched the exchange, her expression unreadable. Her job was done. The threat had been neutralized, the client was secure, and the environment was once again under control. The ripples of this evening's events would spread far and wide. But for her, it was already in the past. She was already scanning the garage again, her mind focused on the next potential threat, the next shadow, the next note in the complex, never-ending symphony of protection. 6 months passed, a period during which the seasons changed, and the aftershocks of that night in the Pinnacle garage solidified into a new reality. For Marcus Thorne, the world had been remade, not in fire, but in a crucible of humiliating silence. His father, after a week of furious, impotent rage, had finally sat him down. The Thorne Industries' fortune was not gone, but it was severely wounded. The failed merger with Finch's corporation had sent a shockwave through the financial community. Robert Thorne had become a pariah, a man whose son's arrogance had cost him the deal of a lifetime. The lesson, Robert had explained in a voice stripped of all its usual bluster, was one of consequences. The trust fund was gone, the sports car was sold, the penthouse apartment was leased to someone else. Marcus was given a small stipend, a one-bedroom apartment in a modest neighborhood, and a single, stark command: figure out how to be a man, not a caricature of one. At first, he had been consumed by a bitter, self-pitying rage. He blamed Anya, he blamed Finch, he blamed everyone but himself. But as the weeks turned into months, and the silence from his old friends became deafening, the anger began to curdle into something else: introspection. He got a job, a real job, bussing tables at a diner where no one knew his name. The work was grueling, the pay was minimal, and for the first time in his life, he was invisible for a reason other than his own choosing. He learned what it was to be tired, to be dismissed, to be judged by the stains on his apron rather than the label on his suit. One afternoon, while on a break, he was walking through a local park and saw a sign for volunteers at a community outreach center. On an impulse he didn't fully understand, he walked in. That was 3 months ago. Today, Marcus was sorting through donated clothing, the scent of antiseptic soap and old fabric clinging to him. He was thinner, his face had lost its arrogant puffiness, and his hands, once soft and manicured, were now calloused. He heard a familiar voice and looked up. It was Ben, the valet from the Pinnacle, but he wasn't wearing a uniform. He was dressed in a smart blazer and was speaking to the center's director, discussing a new scholarship program. Ben looked different too. He stood taller, his voice confident and assured. After his meeting, Ben saw Marcus. There was a flicker of recognition, followed by a moment of awkward silence. "Marcus?" Ben asked, his voice hesitant. Marcus nodded, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. "Hey, Ben! What are you? What are you doing here?" "I work for the Finch Foundation now," Ben explained, a note of quiet pride in his voice. "Mr. Finch, he started a whole division dedicated to professional development and opportunity grants. That talk we were having? We're funding a new vocational training program for this center." He paused, looking at Marcus. Really looking at him. "What about you?" "I volunteer here," Marcus said, gesturing to the piles of clothes. "It's quiet." He took a deep breath, the apology he had practiced 100 times in his head, suddenly feeling inadequate. "Ben, about that night. I am so sorry. The way I acted, the things I said, there's no excuse. I was an arrogant fool, and I am truly, deeply sorry for how I treated you and her." Ben listened, his expression serious. He nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, Marcus. I really do." He looked around the bustling center, at the people getting a hot meal, at the children in the daycare corner. That night changed a lot of lives, mine included. He met Marcus's eyes. "Looks like it changed yours too. For the better, I think." It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. But it was something more valuable. It was acknowledgement. It was a recognition that change was possible, that the person Marcus was becoming was not the person he had been. For Marcus, it felt like the first ray of sunshine after a long, dark winter. The systemic change didn't stop there. Anya Volkov's security firm, bolstered by a massive investment from Alistair Finch, had become the gold standard for a new kind of corporate training. Her program, called the Sparrow Initiative, taught executives and their staff the art of seeing beyond the superficial. It used practical exercises to expose unconscious biases and taught de-escalation techniques based on empathy and respect, not just tactical compliance. The Pinnacle, once the scene of Marcus's humiliation, was the first company to sign up for the training. Now, every employee, from the general manager to the dishwashers, underwent Anya's rigorous course. She would often lead the sessions herself, dressed in her simple, unassuming attire. She would stand before a room of high-powered executives and tell them the story of that night in the garage, not as a tale of vindication, but as a case study in the catastrophic cost of arrogance. She never raised her voice, she never boasted, but her quiet authority filled the room, leaving a more lasting impression than any shouting motivational speaker ever could. She was teaching the world to see the way she saw, to look past the suit or the uniform, and to see the person underneath. With all their hidden strengths and unexpected depths, the ripple effect of that single encounter continued to expand, touching lives in ways none of them could have predicted. The Finch Foundation's Professional Opportunity Grant, which Ben now helped manage, had blossomed into a nationwide initiative. It sought out individuals who showed promise but lacked the resources or connections to advance, people who, like Anya, possessed immense talent hidden beneath a quiet or unassuming exterior. It funded scholarships for aspiring engineers from low-income neighborhoods, provided seed capital for small businesses started by single mothers, and created mentorship programs that paired seasoned executives with young, ambitious employees who might otherwise be overlooked. Alistair Finch had taken the lesson from the garage to heart. He had realized that the greatest untapped resource in the world wasn't a mineral or a new technology, but the potential being ignored every day in people who didn't fit a certain mold. The story of what happened to Marcus Thorne and his friends became a quiet legend in the upper echelons of the business world, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and at country clubs. It was a story about more than just a bad investment. It was about a fundamental misunderstanding of power. It served as a stark reminder that true strength was rarely loud, and that the person you dismiss today could be the one who holds your entire future in their hands tomorrow. The narrative of Anya Volkov also grew. Though she remained intensely private, her reputation for quiet competence and unshakable integrity became her calling card. Companies didn't just hire her for security, they hired her firm for wisdom. She was invited to speak at leadership conferences, not to talk about threat assessments and tactical maneuvers, but to talk about the principles of observation, respect, and the strategic advantage of humility. She would stand on a brightly lit stage, a small, unassuming figure in a simple blouse and slacks, and hold an audience of thousands in rapt attention. She taught them that listening was more powerful than speaking, that stillness was more intimidating than aggression, and that the ability to see the value in everyone, regardless of their station, was the ultimate power move. She was redefining what it meant to be strong in a world that so often took arrogance for confidence. And Marcus? His journey was far from over. But he was on a new path. After months of volunteering, the director of the outreach center, impressed by his dedication and his surprising knack for logistics, offered him a full-time paid position as the volunteer coordinator. It was a humble role, with a humble salary. But it was the first thing he had ever earned entirely on his own merits. He accepted it without hesitation. He found a quiet satisfaction in the work, in helping people who were struggling, in being a small part of a solution rather than a large part of a problem. He sometimes thought about that night in the garage, not with anger or shame anymore, but with a strange sense of gratitude. It had been the end of his world, but it had also been the beginning of his life. He was learning that respect wasn't something you could demand through intimidation or purchase with wealth. It was something you earned through your actions, through kindness, through seeing the humanity in others. He was, in his own small way, finally learning the lesson that Anya Volkov had taught him without ever laying a hand on him. The change was evident not just in individuals, but in the very culture of the institutions they inhabited. At the Pinnacle restaurant, the atmosphere among the staff had transformed. The old, rigid hierarchy, where managers looked down on servers and servers looked down on valets, had been replaced by a newfound sense of mutual respect. The Sparrow Initiative training had given them a shared language, a common understanding that every role was vital to the whole. The valets, once treated as little more than human parking meters, were now seen as the establishment's first ambassadors. They were trained to notice details, to spot a guest who seemed distressed, to de-escalate a tense situation before it ever began. Ben, in his work with the Finch Foundation, would often return to the Pinnacle, not as an employee, but as a partner, helping to refine their training and implement new community engagement programs. He and the general manager, a man who had once barely known his name, now collaborated as equals. Their shared goal, the creation of an environment built on genuine hospitality, not just superficial luxury. This shift sent ripples through the entire high-end service industry, as other five-star establishments, seeing the Pinnacle's improved staff morale and rave customer reviews, began to inquire about Anya Volkov's unconventional training methods. The concept of dignity as a business asset began to take hold. Companies started to realize that an environment where every employee felt seen and respected was not just a moral good, but a competitive advantage. It led to lower turnover, better customer service, and a more resilient and innovative workforce. Anya's philosophy was proving to be not just ethically sound, but also incredibly profitable. Julian Croft and Leo Vance had followed different, though parallel, paths after their fall from grace. Julian, whose identity had been so tied to his physical presence and his family's wealth, had a complete breakdown. After months of aimless drifting, his father, in a last-ditch effort, sent him to work for a distant cousin who ran a wilderness guide company in the mountains. stripped of his designer clothes and surrounded by the raw, unforgiving power of nature. Julian was forced to confront his own weaknesses. He learned to build a fire, to navigate by the stars, to rely on his own strength and ingenuity rather than his father's money. It was a slow, arduous process, but over time, the mountains chipped away at his arrogance, leaving behind a quieter, more thoughtful man. He found that he was good with his hands, that he had a patience he never knew he possessed, and that there was a profound satisfaction in helping others navigate a difficult trail, a satisfaction he had never found in a bottle of expensive champagne. Leo, always the follower, was initially the most lost. Without Marcus to lead and Julian to back him up, he was adrift. His family, embarrassed and financially strained, largely cut him off. He spent the better part of a year bouncing between odd jobs, his resentment festering. The turning point came when he was working as a delivery driver and happened to drop off a package at the community outreach center where Marcus now worked. He saw his old friend, not in a suit, but in a simple polo shirt, laughing with a group of underprivileged children. He saw a man who looked happy, content. The sight shocked Leo out of his self-pity. He fled that day, but the image stayed with him. A few weeks later, he enrolled in a local community college, deciding to study social work. He wanted to understand people, to learn what drove them, a skill he so profoundly lacked. He wanted, for the first time, to build an identity of his own, one that wasn't just a pale reflection of those around him. The three of them, once an inseparable unit bound by arrogance, were now scattered, each on their own solitary journey of redemption, a journey forced upon them by a quiet woman in a gray hoodie. Anya herself remained largely unchanged by the growing legend around her. She still preferred her simple, functional clothing. She still operated from the shadows, her focus always on the mission, not the accolades. While her consulting firm grew into a global enterprise, she delegated most of the day-to-day management, preferring to stay in the field. She could be found personally overseeing security for Finch at a high-stakes climate summit in Geneva one week, and the next, she might be in a remote village in a developing nation, doing pro bono work to help an aid organization protect its supply lines. She moved through the world with the same quiet purpose. Her senses always alert, her mind always calculating. Her relationship with Alistair Finch had evolved from a simple employer-employee dynamic into a deep, unspoken partnership. He was the visionary, the public face of their shared ethos, the one who could leverage wealth and influence to enact large-scale change. She was the anchor, the strategist, the one who kept him grounded in the reality of human behavior. She was his conscience as much as his guardian. He never made a major decision without consulting her, not just for a risk assessment, but for a human assessment. He would ask, "Anya, what do you see here? What are we not seeing?" And she would provide her calm, unvarnished analysis, cutting through the corporate doublespeak and political maneuvering to the heart of the matter. Her ability to see the world without the filters of ego or prejudice had become his most valuable asset. The gray sedan she had been leaning against that night was still her preferred mode of transport. It was anonymous, reliable, and perfectly suited to her needs. She sometimes thought about that encounter, not as a moment of personal victory, but as a critical data point. It had reinforced her core belief that ego was a fatal flaw, both in oneself and in others. It made you loud when you should be quiet. It made you blind when you needed to see. It made you underestimate your adversaries, a mistake she had never made and never would. The incident had become the cornerstone of her teaching, a perfect, real-world example of how a situation can be won or lost before a single punch is thrown. She taught her trainees that true power was control of oneself, control of one's environment, and the ability to control a situation by understanding the weaknesses and motivations of others. The arrogance of Marcus Thorne had been a weapon waiting to be used against him, and Anya had simply allowed him to impale himself upon it. It was an elegant, efficient, and bloodless victory, the kind she prized above all others. One crisp autumn evening, a little over a year after the incident, Anya was standing in that same spot in the Pinnacle's underground garage. She was waiting for Mr. Finch, who was attending a charity gala upstairs that was being co-hosted by his foundation and the community outreach center Marcus Thorne now worked for. The garage had been subtly updated. The lighting was brighter. The security camera coverage was more comprehensive. And the valets now wore small, discreet earpieces, part of a new communication system she had designed. A young woman in a valet uniform approached her, her expression professional and respectful. "Good evening, Ms. Volkov," she said. "Mr. Finch's car is detailed and ready. Is there anything else you require?" "No thank you, Maria. Everything is in order," Anya replied, addressing the valet by name. She had made it a point to know the name and role of every single person who worked in the environments she protected. It was part of her philosophy. Everyone was important, everyone was a piece of the puzzle. The valet nodded and returned to her post, her posture alert and aware. A few minutes later, the elevator chimed, the doors opened, and Alistair Finch stepped out. He was not alone. With him was Marcus Thorne. Marcus was wearing a simple, off-the-rack suit that fit him well enough, but it was a world away from the bespoke creations he used to favor. He looked nervous, but there was a new maturity in his eyes, a quiet humility that hadn't been there before. He saw Anya, and his step faltered for a moment. He paused, his hands fidgeting at his sides. Finch put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Marcus was just giving a speech upstairs," Finch explained to Anya. "He was talking about his journey over the past year. It was quite powerful." Marcus looked at Anya, his expression earnest and free of any of the old arrogance. "Volkov," he began, his voice steady. "I know I apologized before, but I didn't really understand what I was apologizing for. Not really. I do now. I want to thank you." Anya raised a questioning eyebrow. "Thank me?" "Yes," he said, nodding. "You didn't just knock me down. You didn't just humiliate me. You showed me that my entire world was built on a lie. You gave me a chance to start over, to build a life based on something real. I'm a better person now. And that's because of you." He said it not with the fawning desperation of their last encounter, but with the quiet sincerity of a man who had faced his own demons and had begun the long process of conquering them. It was, Anya recognized, a moment of genuine human connection, something her life rarely afforded her. She gave him the same slow, deliberate nod she had given him when he was on his knees on this very floor. But this time, it was different. It was not an acknowledgement of surrender. It was an acknowledgement of growth. It was a sign of respect. "You did the work, Mr. Thorne," she said simply. "That is to your credit, not mine." With that, she opened the rear door of the sedan for Mr. Finch, her professional duties resuming. The incident was now truly closed, the final thread tied off, the circle was complete. The boy who had threatened her had become a man who thanked her, and the system that had allowed his arrogance to flourish was being remade from the inside out. As the car pulled away from the pinnacle, leaving the bright lights of the garage behind, Anya scanned the dark streets, her eyes ever watchful, her mind already on the next horizon, forever the silent guardian. The unseen force of change in a world that was slowly, painstakingly learning to see. How often do we judge a book by its cover, a person by their clothing, or a soul by their station in life? The world is full of hidden geniuses, quiet heroes, and unassuming guardians who walk among us, their true worth invisible to those who refuse to see. The most profound strength is often found not in the loudest voice in the room, but in the calmest spirit. What would happen if we all took a moment to look deeper, to listen more carefully, and to treat every person we meet with the respect and dignity they deserve, regardless of their appearance? You might just discover a strength and a potential you never knew existed, both in them and in yourself. The next time you see someone standing quietly in the corner, remember the story of the woman in the gray hoodie. You never know who you're looking at. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe for more tales of quiet strength and unexpected vindication. And in the comments below, tell us about a time you misjudged someone, or a time someone saw the hidden potential in you. Your story matters. Let's create a community built on seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary.